On my daughter's wedding morning, our family driver pushed me into the trunk and threw a blanket over me. "What the hell are you doing?" I yelled. "Sir, please hide in here. Don't say a word. You need to see this." "Trust me," he said. Minutes later, what I saw through the crack left me completely frozen. My name is Victor Calloway, and at 77 years old, I thought I had seen the worst of humanity in the cutthroat world of industrial real estate. I built an empire worth $480 million from nothing but grit and concrete. I have stared down union strikes, hostile takeovers, and market crashes. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the darkness of my own garage that morning. If you have ever felt the sting of betrayal from the one person you would die for, hit that like button. And subscribe, because I am about to show you how I turned a coffin into a cockpit. It started with the smell of gasoline and old carpet. I was standing next to my vintage Rolls-Royce, checking my tie in the side mirror. The morning sun was hitting the Newport coast, and the air smelled of salt and expensive flowers. It should have been the happiest day of my life. I was about to walk Madison, my only child, down the aisle. Then a blur of motion. Benny, my driver for over a decade, slammed into me. Benny is a former Marine, 6 feet of solid muscle, usually as gentle as a lamb. But in that moment, he was terrifying. He didn't ask. He didn't explain. He shoved me with the force of a battering ram into the open trunk of the black Cadillac Escalade we used for airport runs. My hip bone slammed against the spare tire well. Pain shot up my spine. I opened my mouth to scream, to fire him, to demand to know if he had lost his mind. But his hand, heavy and calloused, clamped over my mouth. His face was inches from mine, sweating profusely. "Shh. Quiet, Mr. Calloway. For the love of God, be quiet. You need to see this. Just watch." He threw a heavy wool moving blanket over my legs and lowered the heavy trunk lid. He didn't latch it. He left a gap barely 2 centimeters wide, a sliver of light in the suffocating darkness. I lay there curled up like a fetus, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The trunk was hot. The air was thick with dust. I was furious. I was confused. I was a billionaire lying in the back of an SUV like a kidnapped victim. I was about to kick the lid open and call the police when I heard the footsteps. Click, click, click. I knew that sound. It was the sound of custom-made heels hitting the polished concrete floor. It was the rhythm of my life for the past 32 years. Madison. Through the narrow crack, my field of vision was limited, but I saw her. She walked into the frame of light. My breath hitched in my throat. She looked breathtaking. The dress was a custom Vera Wang masterpiece that I had paid $25,000 for. Lace silk pearls. She looked like an angel. But then the angel did something that made my blood run cold. She reached into the hidden pocket of her dress and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. Marlboro Reds. She flicked a gold lighter and inhaled deeply, the smoke curling around her pristine white veil. My mind raced. Madison had sworn to me on her mother's deathbed that she had quit smoking 10 years ago. She always lectured me about my health, about living long enough to see my grandchildren. Yet here she was, sucking down nicotine like a sailor, her face twisted not in joy, but in impatience. Then a second pair of shoes entered my vision. Italian leather loafers, shiny, expensive. Liam, my future son-in-law. The hedge fund manager, who had charmed his way into our lives with talk of synergy and family values. I never trusted his smile. It didn't reach his eyes. But Madison loved him, and that was enough for me. Or so I told myself. "Did the old man take the pills?" Liam asked. His voice wasn't warm. It was flat. Transactional. I held my breath. "Pills? What pills?" Madison exhaled a cloud of gray smoke directly toward the trunk where I was hiding. "Every single one," she laughed. It was a sound I had never heard before. It wasn't the melodic laugh of my little girl. It was sharp, vicious, cruel. I told him they were experimental vitamins from that clinic in Zurich. I told him they would help with his heart palpitations and keep his energy up for the reception. He swallowed them like a good little puppy. He trusts me so much it is almost pathetic. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Those blue capsules. She had given them to me at breakfast with a glass of orange juice. She had kissed my cheek and told me she wanted me to be strong for the big day. I took them. I took them because I loved her, because I trusted her. Liam chuckled, checking his reflection in the tinted window of the Escalade just inches from my face. And you are sure about the timing? We cannot have him crashing too early. Madison flicked ash onto the floor. The floor I paid a fortune to keep spotless. 100%, she said. I double-checked the dosage with the pharmacist online. The diuretic effect combined with the muscle relaxant kicks in exactly 4 hours after ingestion. That puts us right at the start of the procession. Right when the music starts. Right when all 300 guests, the mayor, the press, and the board of directors are looking at him. She paused, a wicked smile spreading across her face. He won't just stumble, Liam. He's going to lose complete bladder control. He's going to soil himself halfway down the aisle. He will be a pissing, stumbling mess in front of the entire elite of Newport. I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. The horror of it washed over me. The humiliation. They weren't just trying to drug me. They were planning to destroy my dignity in the most public way possible. But why? Just for a laugh, Liam's next words hit me harder than Benny's shove. Perfect. As soon as he humiliates himself, as soon as he looks like a senile, incontinent invalid who can't even control his own body. Pendergast makes his move. Pendergast. Judge Pendergast. An old family friend. A man I had invited to the wedding. Judge Pendergast is already in the front row with the papers drafted. Liam continued adjusting his cufflinks. Emergency conservatorship based on sudden cognitive decline and physical inability to care for self. We will use the incident as proof that his mind is gone. We will have power of attorney by the time the paramedics are cleaning him up. Madison dropped the cigarette butt and crushed it under her heel, her white satin shoe grinding the ash into the ground. And by Monday morning, we will have control of the accounts. $480 million. Finally, I am so tired of waiting for him to die naturally. He is too stubborn. This way is faster. And honestly, putting him in a home is a kindness. He won't even know where he is after we up the dosage. The world stopped spinning. The garage grew silent save for the buzzing of a fly and the pounding in my ears. $480 million. That was the price of my dignity. That was the price of a father's love. They did not just want my money. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to lock me away in a padded room drugged out of my mind, while they spent the fortune I broke my back to build. I lay there in the dark, tears streaming down my face, soaking into the dusty carpet of the trunk. My own daughter. The girl I read bedtime stories to. The girl I held when she scraped her knee. The girl I bought this house for. She wasn't just a spoiled brat. She was a monster. And she was standing 3 feet away from me, planning my demise. Benny's hand found my shoulder in the dark. He squeezed it hard. It was a silent message. I told you. I realized then that Benny had saved my life. If I had walked down that aisle, my life would have been over. I would have been a prisoner in my own body, locked away by the people I loved. I closed my eyes. The image of my daughter smoking in her wedding dress, talking about putting me in a home, burned into my retinas. I wiped the tears away with the back of my hand. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by something hotter, something stronger. Rage. Cold, calculating rage. They wanted a senile old man. They wanted a show, fine. I would give them a show. But it wasn't going to be the tragedy they wrote. It was going to be a reckoning. I waited until the sound of their footsteps faded away, until the garage door clicked shut. Then I pushed the trunk lid open. I didn't feel 77 anymore. I felt dangerous. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me in the comments. If your child did this to you, would you forgive them or would you destroy them? Because I made my choice the moment I climbed out of that trunk. And trust me, you are going to want to hear this, lying in the cramped darkness of the Cadillac trunk. The smell of gasoline and dust filled my lungs, but it was the memory of the last 2 months that truly suffocated me. My knees were pressed against my chest, aching with a dull throb that had become my constant companion lately. For weeks, I had convinced myself that this pain, this weakness, was just the inevitable price of aging. I am 77 after all. Men my age are supposed to slow down. But looking back now, huddled in the back of my own car like a fugitive, I realized the decline had not been gradual. It had been a cliff drop. It started about 8 weeks ago. I was in the boardroom ready to sign the acquisition papers for a new logistics hub in Savannah. It was a deal I had been chasing for 5 years. I picked up my favorite fountain pen, a Mont Blanc that had signed billion-dollar contracts, but when I touched the paper, my hand refused to cooperate. It shook violently. The ink bled across the signature line, turning my name into an illegible, jagged mess. I remembered the look of pity in the eyes of the young executives across the table. That look cut deeper than any insult. I had excused myself blaming too much coffee, but deep down terror had taken root. Day by day, the fog in my brain grew thicker. I would walk into a room and forget why I was there. I would lose my keys, then my glasses, then my temper. I went from running a multinational corporation to being unable to button my own shirt without fumbling. I felt like I was losing my mind piece by piece. And the whole time Madison was there, hovering like a guardian angel, or so I thought. She moved back into the estate to take care of me, she said. She fired the nurse I had hired, insisting that family should care for family. I was so touched by her devotion that I didn't see the shackles she was placing on me. I shifted my weight in the trunk, the metal latch digging into my hip, as my mind replayed the morning that started the nightmare. It was a Tuesday. Sunlight was streaming into the breakfast nook, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Madison was standing by the counter, holding a small amber bottle with a white medical cross on the label. She looked tired, her eyes red-rimmed, as if she had been crying all night. "Daddy, please," she had whimpered, placing 2 bright blue capsules on a napkin next to my oatmeal. "I know you hate taking pills, but Dr. Evans said these are crucial. They are from that specialized clinic in Switzerland. They are not just vitamins. They are a new peptide blend for your heart and neural pathways. It cost me $5,000 for this bottle, but I don't care about the money. I just want you to be around, to walk me down the aisle. I can't do this without you." Her voice had cracked on the last word. I looked at her, my little girl, so terrified of losing her father. Guilt washed over me. I felt like a burden, a stubborn old mule making his daughter's life miserable. I reached out my hand, trembling as usual, and took the pills. "Thank you, sweetheart," I had said. "I promise I will take them. I would do anything for you." She watched me like a hawk. She didn't move until I lifted the glass of water to my lips. But that morning something felt wrong. Maybe it was the way Liam was pretending to read the newspaper in the corner, but was actually watching me over the rim of his coffee cup. Maybe it was a survival instinct honed by 50 years of navigating shark-filled boardrooms. As I brought the cup to my mouth, I pretended to cough, a violent hacking cough that made me bend over. In the commotion, while Madison rushed to pat my back, I slipped the blue pills out of my mouth and into the palm of my hand. When she turned away to get a napkin, I didn't flush them. I didn't throw them in the trash where they could be found. I shoved them deep into the soil of the bonsai tree that sat on the windowsill. That tree was my pride and joy. It was a Japanese white pine over 60 years old, a gift from the CEO of Toyota when we partnered in the 90s. It was robust green and stood as a symbol of longevity and resilience. It had survived winter frosts and summer heat waves. I figured the soil would hide the evidence of my disobedience. I drank the water, gave Madison a reassuring smile, and went about my day feeling a strange sense of victory for outsmarting my nursemaid, even if just for one morning. But the victory was short-lived. The memory of what happened next hit me so hard in the trunk that I gasped, inhaling a mouthful of stale air. The very next morning I had walked into the kitchen for coffee. The sun was shining just as bright, but on the windowsill, death had arrived overnight. The bonsai tree was gone. Well, not gone, but destroyed. The vibrant emerald green needles that had thrived for decades were now a sickly, brittle brown. They lay scattered on the white marble sill like dry confetti. The branches, usually strong and flexible, looked shriveled, as if the life had been sucked out of them by a vacuum. I stood there, frozen, my coffee cup halfway to my mouth. I touched a branch and it snapped with a dry crack. My heart hammered in my chest. I knew logically that trees don't die overnight. Not like this. Not a tree that has survived for 60 years. I looked at the soil where I had buried the blue pills. The earth there looked strange, almost scorched, with a faint white residue on the surface. A cold shiver had run down my spine, then a whisper of suspicion that was too terrible to entertain. Did the pills do this? If 2 pills could kill a 60-year-old pine tree in 24 hours, what were they doing to my 77-year-old stomach? What were they doing to my brain? But then the denial kicked in. The human mind is excellent at protecting itself from truths it cannot handle. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself it must have been a root-rot fungus, or maybe the gardener had used the wrong fertilizer. I told myself that my daughter, the girl I taught to ride a bike, the girl I carried on my shoulders at Disney World, would never hurt me. It was impossible. She loved me. She was just worried about my health. I swept the dead needles into the trash and told the housekeeper to throw the tree away, refusing to look at it again. I chose to be blind because seeing was too painful. Suddenly, the silence in the trunk was broken. Benny's voice came through the darkness, low and urgent, pulling me out of my memories. He was driving now, the car moving smoothly over the highway, but I could hear the tension in his breathing. "Mr. Calloway," Benny whispered, and I could visualize his eyes checking the rearview mirror. "You are thinking about the tree, aren't you? The bonsai." I stiffened. I hadn't told anyone about the tree. How did he know I saw you? Benny continued, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "I was washing the car outside the window that morning. I saw you hide the pills, and I saw the tree the next day. But I didn't just let the housekeeper throw it away, sir. I took the pot. I took a sample of the soil and the dissolved residue of those pills to a contact of mine, a guy who used to run toxicology for the Corps." My heart stopped. The air in the trunk felt suddenly thinner. "He called me back 2 hours ago," Benny said, and his voice dropped an octave, becoming grim and hard. "That is why I shoved you in the trunk. I couldn't let you walk down that aisle. Those weren't vitamins, Mr. Calloway. They weren't heart medication. It was a cocktail. High-grade haloperidol mixed with arsenic." The words hung in the dark like a death sentence. Haloperidol. Arsenic. "The haloperidol is an antipsychotic," Benny explained, his military training taking over, delivering the intel with brutal precision. "In a healthy brain, it causes confusion, tremors, memory loss, and loss of motor control. It mimics severe dementia. That is why your hands have been shaking. That is why you can't remember yesterday. But the arsenic, that is the kicker. They were giving it to you in microdoses. Just enough to weaken your heart muscles without killing you instantly. They were building up toxicity in your system so that when your heart finally gave out, it would look like a natural cardiac arrest caused by the stress of your condition." I couldn't breathe. Tears streamed down my face, hot and stinging. It wasn't just greed. It wasn't just a scheme to get power of attorney. It was a slow, calculated execution. My daughter watched me shake. She watched me forget my own name, and she smiled and handed me another pill knowing it was killing me. She was murdering me by inches right in front of my eyes and calling it love. They didn't just want your money, sir, Benny added, his voice cracking with suppressed rage. They wanted you to lose your mind first, so no one would believe you when you screamed. They wanted to erase who you are before they erased your life. I clenched my fists in the dark. The tremors were gone. The adrenaline of the truth had burned away the fog. The sadness I felt earlier was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I was not a father anymore. I was not a victim. I was a survivor. And as the car sped towards the church, I knew one thing for certain. The Victor Calloway who climbed out of this trunk would not be the same man who was shoved into it. They wanted a show. They wanted a tragedy. I would give them one. But the ending was going to be very different from the script they had written. As the Escalade hit a pothole, my head banged against the wheel well, sending a jolt of pain through my neck that matched the sudden clarity exploding in my mind. The revelation about the poison had unlocked a door in my memory, a door I had been too fogged up to open just 3 days ago. Lying there in the dark, clutching the dusty carpet, I realized the poison wasn't the only weapon they had used against me. They had also disarmed me legally, and I had handed them the knife. My mind drifted back to the library on Wednesday afternoon. It was my favorite room in the house, smelling of old leather and mahogany, a sanctuary where I had closed deals that reshaped the city skyline. I was sitting behind my desk, the heavy oak surface covered with the final draft of the prenuptial agreement. It was a standard document for a man of my net worth, designed to keep the Calloway empire intact, regardless of marital strife. Clause 4B specifically stated that in the event of a divorce, Madison's inheritance and the company shares would remain in the family trust, untouchable by any spouse. Liam had walked in wearing that casual confidence that always irritated me slightly. He was in tennis whites, swinging a racket, looking like he didn't have a care in the world. I pushed the document toward him. "Liam," I said, my voice sounding raspy even then. "This is the prenup. Take it to your lawyer, read it over. We can discuss any amendments next week." I expected resistance. I expected him to negotiate. He was a hedge fund manager after all. His entire career was built on reading fine print and finding loopholes. You don't manage a $100 million portfolio by being agreeable. But Liam didn't even pick up the document. He didn't scan the pages. He didn't ask about the vesting schedule or the alimony caps. He just picked up a pen from my desk, a cheap ballpoint I used for crosswords, and uncapped it. "Where do I sign, Dad?" he asked, flashing that bright, hollow smile. I frowned, confused. "Liam, you need to read it. This protects both of us. It is 40 pages of legal density. You cannot just sign it blindly." He laughed, a sound that echoed too loudly in the quiet room. "Victor, I am marrying Madison because she is the love of my life. I don't care about your money. I make my own. Keep your millions. I just want your daughter." And then with a flourish, he scribbled his signature on the bottom line. He didn't even initial the previous pages. He dropped the pen, patted my shoulder with a hand that felt clammy, and walked out whistling. At the time, the drugs in my system made me think it was a noble gesture. I thought, finally, a man who isn't after the Calloway cash. But now, in the cold, hard reality of the trunk, I saw it for what it was. It wasn't nobility. It was arrogance. He didn't read the prenup because he knew it would never be enforced. He knew that by the time the wedding cake was cut, I would be declared mentally incompetent. A contract signed with a senile man is void. He wasn't signing away his rights. He was signing a piece of paper that he planned to burn. The suspicion burned in my gut, hotter than the acid reflux. That afternoon, the unease had gnawed at me enough that I tried to call Leonard. Leonard has been my personal attorney for 40 years. He is a pit bull in a suit. He drafted my will, my business contracts, and he knows where every skeleton is buried. If anyone could smell a rat in Liam's behavior, it was Leonard. I picked up the phone, my fingers fumbling over the keypad. I dialed his private number. It went straight to voicemail. That was odd. Leonard sleeps with his phone. He once answered a call from me during his own daughter's recital. I called his office. Voicemail. I called his home. Ringing, then nothing. I walked out into the hallway feeling dizzy and bumped into Madison. She was carrying a stack of RSVP cards. Have you seen Leonard? I asked, leaning against the wall for support. I need to run this prenup by him. He isn't answering. Madison didn't flinch. She didn't even look up from the cards. Oh, Daddy, I forgot to tell you. Uncle Leonard is on a cruise. A cruise, I repeated, my brain sluggish. Yes, she said, smiling sweetly. He booked a last-minute trip to the Mediterranean, a digital detox. He said he wouldn't have any signal for 2 weeks. He sent an email to the office saying not to disturb him. I nodded, accepting the lie because my brain was too tired to fight it. But now the memory made me want to scream. Leonard hates boats. He gets seasick in a bathtub. In '98, I took him on the Staten Island ferry, and he spent the entire trip with his head in a trash can. The idea of Leonard voluntarily getting on a cruise ship for 2 weeks was as likely as me joining a boy band. They had removed my shield. They knew Leonard would stop the conservatorship hearing. He would demand independent medical evaluations. He would fight Pendergast tooth and nail, so they had to get him out of the way. Suddenly, Benny's voice cut through the partition again, startling me. He must have been watching me through the internal camera he had rigged. Sir, reach into the side pocket on your right, behind the jack. I left something for you. I fumbled in the dark, my hand brushing against cold metal tools until I felt the smooth glass of a tablet screen. I pulled it out. It was already on the glow, illuminating the cramped space of the trunk with a ghostly blue light. It wasn't a cruise ship on the screen. It was a photo, grainy and taken from a distance, but clear enough. It showed a man sitting on a bench in a small fenced-in courtyard. He was wearing a gray sweatsuit. His head was slumped forward. It was Leonard. But he wasn't looking at the Mediterranean sunset. He was staring at a concrete wall. Swipe left, Benny said, his voice tight. I swiped. The next image was a document, a scanned copy of an involuntary commitment order. The header read, Sunnyvale Wellness Center. I knew the place. It was a high-security rehab facility upstate, usually reserved for severe drug addicts and danger-to-self cases. I scanned the text, my eyes widening in horror. The patient, Leonard Davies, exhibits signs of acute paranoia and substance-induced psychosis. Immediate 72-hour hold authorized. And there, at the bottom of the page, was the signature that sealed his fate. It wasn't a doctor's signature. It was a judicial order, signed by the Honorable Judge Silas Pendergast. The tablet slipped from my fingers and landed softly on the blanket. The puzzle was complete, and the picture was terrifying. They hadn't just drugged me. They had systematically dismantled my entire defense network. They had poisoned the king, imprisoned the knight, and bought the bishop. Pendergast, the man I had played golf with for 20 years, the man who had eaten at my table, had signed a fake order to lock my lawyer away in a psych ward so there would be no one to object when he declared me insane today. Leonard wasn't on a boat. He was probably sedated in a padded room, screaming my name, unable to get out. A wave of cold isolation washed over me, deeper and darker than the trunk I was lying in. I was completely alone. My daughter was the architect of my destruction. My son-in-law was the executioner. My lawyer was a prisoner. My friends were either conspirators or easily fooled spectators. I had no phone. I had no allies. I had no voice. Except for Benny. I looked at the back of the driver's seat. A man I paid $60,000 a year. A man I barely spoke to other than to say, "Home Benny" or "Office Benny." He was the only thing standing between me and a life sentence in a nursing home. The irony was bitter enough to choke on. I had spent my life building a fortress of wealth to protect myself, but in the end my safety depended on the loyalty of the one man I hadn't bothered to write a prenup for. "We are 5 minutes out," Benny said, pulling the car onto the gravel road that led to the church. "I hope you are ready, Mr. Calloway. Because once we stop, there is no going back." I picked up the tablet again, staring at Leonard's defeated posture. I wasn't just fighting for my money anymore. I was fighting for Leonard. I was fighting for the truth. And as the car slowed down, I realized something else. They had made a fatal mistake. They thought they had isolated me. They thought they had cut off my head. But they forgot that a cornered animal is the most dangerous thing on earth. Tell me in the comments, have you ever realized that the people you pay are more loyal than the people you raised? Because I was about to learn that lesson in the hardest way possible. Stay tuned, because what happens when this car stops is going to change everything. The heavy hydraulic whine of the garage door sealing shut was the only signal that it was safe to breathe again. The moment the lock clicked, the trunk lid flew open, and fresh air rushed in to displace the stale smell of carpet and fear. Benny did not offer a hand to help me up. He knew my pride was the only thing holding my skeleton together at that moment, so he stepped back and let me crawl out of that Escalade on my own terms. My legs were numb, and my tuxedo was wrinkled, but as my feet hit the concrete, I forced my spine to straighten. I was Victor Calloway, and I would not cower in my own garage. "Follow me," Benny said, his voice dropping to a command rather than a request. He didn't lead me toward the door that connected to the kitchen. Instead, he walked to the far corner of the garage where the heavy tool chests stood. He gripped the side of a massive red snap-on cabinet and pulled. It swung open on silent, well-oiled hinges, revealing not wrenches or screwdrivers but a descending steel staircase that plunged into the darkness beneath the foundation. I stared at him. I had lived in this house for 30 years. I had built it. I knew every inch of the blueprints. Or so I thought. "When did you build this?" I asked, the gravel in my voice betraying my shock. "When you started getting sick," Sir Benny replied without looking back. "I spent my weekends digging. I knew eventually we would need a bunker." We descended into the cool, damp air of the maintenance pit. But this was no ordinary mechanic's hole. It was a fully equipped tactical operations center. A bank of high-definition monitors lined the concrete wall, glowing with feeds from every corner of my estate. There was a cot in the corner, a pot of coffee that smelled burned, and a server rack humming with data. This man, whom I had treated as a piece of furniture for a decade, had built a fortress beneath my feet while I was busy losing my mind. "Sit," Benny said, pointing to a leather office chair. "Watch screen 3. I sat. My hands gripped the armrests as the image on screen 3 flickered into focus. It was the guest suite in the East Wing, the room we had assigned to Liam for the wedding preparations. He was there, pacing back and forth, still wearing his tuxedo trousers, but he had stripped off his shirt. He looked agitated, running a hand through his gelled hair. He was holding his phone to his ear, but he wasn't speaking in the charming deferential tone he used with me. His face was twisted in a snarl of triumph and hatred. I leaned in the speaker on the wall, amplifying his voice. "It is done, Dad," Liam hissed into the phone. "The old man is a wreck. He is going to humiliatingly collapse before he even reaches the altar. By noon, the Calloway name will be mud." I frowned. Dad Liam's father had died in a car accident when Liam was a teenager. That was the sob story he had told us over dinner the night he asked for Madison's hand. He said he was an orphan who pulled himself up by his bootstraps. Who was he talking to? "We are taking it all back." Liam continued, his voice trembling with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Every brick, every acre, every dollar he stole from us. The Calloway house falls today, just like you promised me it would before you left." He stopped pacing and walked over to his suitcase. He pulled out a framed photograph and set it on the dresser. The camera angle was perfect. I could see the face in the photo clearly. It was a black and white portrait of a man with sharp cheekbones and eyes that burned with the same intensity as Liam's. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that man. I hadn't seen that face in 20 years, but it haunted my nightmares for a decade. Marcus Sterling. The memories hit me like a physical blow. 2 decades ago, Marcus Sterling was my biggest rival. We were fighting for the contract to develop the Newport shipping terminal. It was a ruthless war. I used every legal loophole, every connection, and every aggressive tactic in the book to outmaneuver him. I won. I crushed him. I bankrupted his company and bought his assets for pennies on the dollar. 3 days later, Marcus Sterling walked into his office, locked the door, and put a bullet in his head. I remembered the funeral. It was raining. I stood in the back feeling a pang of guilt, but telling myself it was just business. I remembered a skinny, pale boy standing by the grave holding an umbrella that was too big for him. He didn't cry. He just stared at me with hollow, dead eyes. That boy was Liam. Liam Gallagher was a lie. He was Liam Sterling. He had changed his name. He had erased his history. He had spent 20 years planning this moment. He didn't love my daughter. He didn't want my company for the profit. He wanted to burn my life to the ground to avenge his father. He wanted to do to me exactly what I had done to Marcus. Destroy my legacy, humiliate me, and leave me with nothing. He wasn't on the phone with anyone. He was talking to a dead man. He was reporting his victory to a ghost. A cold realization settled in my bones. This was why he signed the prenup without reading it. He didn't care about the money in the divorce. He intended to destroy the assets, to liquidate the empire, to leave the Calloway name in ruins, just as I had left the Sterlings. But then the door to the guest suite on the screen opened. Madison walked in. I braced myself. Surely she didn't know. Surely my daughter was a pawn in this sick game of revenge. If she knew who he really was, she would be horrified. She would see that he was using her to get to me. Madison walked up to Liam. She didn't hug him. She didn't kiss him. She looked at the photo of Marcus Sterling on the dresser, and then looked at Liam. "Stop talking to the picture, Liam," she said, her voice sharp and impatient. "It creeps me out." My heart stopped. She knew who he was. Liam turned to her, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Don't be jealous, babe. He is the reason we are here. Without his motivation, I wouldn't have had the stomach to drug your father for 3 months. Madison rolled her eyes and poured herself a drink from the minibar. "I don't care about your daddy issues, Liam. I really don't. You can have your revenge. You can burn his reputation. You can dance on his grave for all I care. Just get me the signature on the conservatorship." "Why, Madison?" I whispered to the screen, tears blurring my vision. "Why are you doing this?" As if answering my question. Madison took a long gulp of vodka and turned to face Liam. "The casino in Macau called again this morning. They are not waiting anymore. The interest has compounded. I owe them $12 million, Liam. 12. If I don't wire them a significant down payment by Monday morning, they are going to send people to break my legs. Or worse." She slammed the glass down. "I need control of his accounts now. I can't wait for him to die. He is too healthy. He is too stubborn. I need that money liquid, and I need it today. So if your plan involves drugging him into a vegetable so I can pay off my debt, then so be it. Just make sure the judge signs the papers before the reception ends." The truth was a knife twisting in my gut. It wasn't just revenge. It was desperation. My daughter was a gambling addict, a degenerate gambler who had racked up a $12 million debt with loan sharks. She wasn't just a spoiled brat. She was terrified and cornered. And to save herself, she had decided to sacrifice me. She had made a deal with the devil. She gave Liam his revenge, and in exchange he would give her the keys to my vault. I slumped back in the chair, the energy draining out of me. I had built an empire, but I had failed to build a family. I had raised a daughter who would sell my sanity for a poker debt. I had invited a viper into my home who wanted to settle a 20-year-old blood feud. Benny turned off the monitor. The silence in the bunker was deafening. "You see it now," Sir Benny said softly. "You see why we couldn't call the police. It is domestic. It is messy. And they have a judge in their pocket." I looked up at Benny. The grief was gone. In its place was a cold, hard clarity. It was the same clarity I had felt the day I crushed Marcus Sterling. They wanted a war. They wanted to play games with lives and legacies. Well, they had forgotten one thing. I wrote the rulebook on Ruthless. I stood up. I smoothed the wrinkles on my tuxedo jacket. I checked my watch. "The ceremony starts in 30 minutes, I said, my voice steady and low. Benny nodded. "The antidote I gave you is already working. The tremors should stop in 10 minutes. Your mind is clearing up." I looked at the stairs leading back up to the garage. "I am not going to run, Benny. And I am not going to hide in this hole." Benny grinned a wolfish smile that told me he had been waiting for this moment. "What is the plan, Victor?" I walked to the mirror hanging on the concrete wall and adjusted my tie. I looked into my own eyes. They were tired, yes, but they were sharp. "They want a senile old man to walk down that aisle," I said. "They want a helpless victim. So I am going to give them the greatest performance of my life. I am going to walk into that trap, and I am going to let them think they have won." Until the very last second. I turned to Benny. "Get the car ready. But not the Escalade. Get the rolls. If I am going to a funeral, I am going to arrive in style. But Benny, keep those recordings safe. Because when the cake is cut, I am going to serve them a slice of reality they will choke on. Tell me in the comments, what is the biggest betrayal you have ever experienced? Was it money or was it blood? Because I was about to find out that blood stains are the hardest to wash out. Stay with me. The wedding march is about to begin, and you won't believe who is walking me down the aisle. The realization that I was utterly alone in my own town hit me harder than the physical blow of being shoved into the trunk. My hand had instinctively gone to the pocket of my jacket, searching for my cell phone, my fingers trembling with a mix of rage and desperation. I needed to call Chief Stevens. We had barbecued together last 4th of July. He had eaten my ribs and drank my beer. He would stop this madness. He would send a squad car to arrest these conspirators before the first note of the wedding march was played. But before I could even pull the device out, Benny's hand shot out and gripped my wrist. It wasn't an aggressive move, but it was firm, carrying the weight of a man who knew the battlefield better than the general. He shook his head slowly, his eyes dark and serious in the dim light of the bunker. "You cannot call Stevens, sir," Benny said, his voice low and devoid of hope. "Think about it. Who do you think introduced Pendergast to your son-in-law? Who do you think helped bury the zoning violation tickets for Liam's new condo project last month? They play golf every Sunday at the country club. If you call Stevens, Pendergast will know in 5 minutes. You will be in a straitjacket and sedated in the back of an ambulance before the police cruiser even pulls into the driveway. The local police aren't your friends today, Mr. Calloway. They are part of the payroll." I slumped back into the leather chair, the air rushing out of my lungs. He was right. I had been so busy building my empire that I hadn't noticed the termites eating away at the foundation of my social circle. I was trapped in a gilded cage surrounded by people who were either bought or blind. The despair threatened to swallow me whole. If the law was corrupt and my family was treacherous, what did I have left? "You need the feds," Benny said, answering the question I hadn't asked aloud. "You need someone outside of this cesspool. Someone who hates Pendergast as much as we do." My mind raced, flipping through a mental Rolodex of contacts accumulated over 50 years of business. Then a name surfaced from the murky waters of the past. Daniel Miller. 10 years ago, he was a young, ambitious FBI field agent, who had stumbled upon a money laundering scheme involving one of my subcontractors. He was about to be fired, scapegoated by his superiors to protect a politician. I had stepped in. I provided the forensic accounting records that exonerated him and proved he was being set up. I saved his badge, and more importantly, I saved his reputation. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but the Christmas card he sent every December always had a handwritten note. "If you ever need a heavy lifter, call me." I looked at Benny. "Give me your phone." He handed me a burner phone, untraceable. I dialed the number from memory. It rang 3 times, each ring echoing the pounding of my heart. Miller, a gruff voice, answered. "No pleasantries. Just business." "It is Victor Calloway," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I am calling in the marker, Daniel. The eagle is being clipped." There was a pause on the other end, a silence that stretched for an eternity. Then the tone of his voice shifted, becoming sharp and alert. "Talk to me, Victor." I kept it brief, using codes we had established years ago during the investigation. I told him about the poison, the fraud, the judge, and the wire transfer to the casino. I told him I was a hostage in my own home, minutes away from being legally erased. "I need the cavalry at the church," I whispered. "Noon. But I need you to come in quiet. I need them to think they have won until the ink is dry." "We are rolling out," Miller said. "I have a team 2 towns over on a racketeering stakeout. We can be there in 20 minutes. Sit tight, Victor, and don't die on me." The line went dead. I handed the phone back to Benny, feeling a small spark of hope ignite in my chest. But Benny wasn't smiling. He was pacing the small concrete room, checking the monitors, checking his watch. "Sir, the FBI can't arrest them for talking in a bedroom," Benny said, stopping in front of me. "Conspiracy is hard to prove without a smoking gun. We need them to execute the fraud. We need the judge to sign that order. We need your daughter to lie to the authorities on record. We need to catch them in the act." I looked at him, confused. "So what are you saying?" "I am saying you have to go out there," Benny said, his eyes locking onto mine. "You have to put that tuxedo back on. You have to walk into that wedding, and you have to play the part. You have to let them think the poison is working. You have to stumble. You have to look confused. You have to let Pendergast drag you onto that stage and declare you incompetent. We need him to put his pen to paper. That is the felony. That is the moment the trap snaps shut." My stomach churned. He was asking me to humiliate myself willingly. He was asking me to walk into a room of 300 people, my peers, my rivals, the press, and act like a senile, broken old man who had lost control of his faculties. He was asking me to destroy the image of strength I had spent a lifetime cultivating. "If you don't do this," Benny continued, his voice softer now, almost pleading, "they walk away. They might lose the money today, but they will come back. Pendergast stays a judge. Liam stays free to con someone else. Madison stays desperate and dangerous. The only way to stop this permanently is to let them hang themselves with their own rope. You have to be the bait, Victor." I closed my eyes. The image of the dead bonsai tree flashed in my mind. The image of Leonard in the psych ward. The image of Madison smoking in her wedding dress. They didn't care about my dignity. They wanted my life. If sacrificing my pride for 1 hour was the price to pay to save my legacy and punish the wicked, then so be it. I opened my eyes and stood up. "Do it," I said. Benny nodded and walked over to a metal medical case on the shelf. He popped the latches and pulled out a sterile syringe filled with a clear liquid. "This is a stimulant cocktail I used in the Corps," he explained, tapping the needle. "Epinephrine and a blocking agent. It will keep your heart beating strong even if they slip you more arsenic. It will keep your mind sharp no matter what they put in your drink. But it won't stop the shaking. You have to fake the weakness. You have to sell it, Victor." "Can you do that?" I took off my jacket and rolled up my sleeve. I didn't flinch as the needle pierced my skin. I felt the cold liquid enter my bloodstream, followed by a rush of heat that started in my chest and spread to my fingertips. My vision sharpened. The fatigue evaporated. I felt a surge of energy, raw and electric. I walked over to the small mirror hanging above the sink in the corner of the bunker. I looked at the man in the reflection. Victor Calloway, the titan of industry, the man who never backed down. Then I let it go. I slumped my shoulders forward, curving my spine as if the weight of the world was crushing me. I let my jaw go slack, my mouth hanging slightly open. I relaxed the muscles around my eyes until they looked glassy and vacant. I let my hands tremble at my sides. In the mirror, the powerful billionaire vanished. In his place stood a frail, confused old man who looked like he didn't know where he was. It was a terrifying transformation, but it was perfect. I turned back to Benny. He looked at me impressed. "You look like hell, boss," he said. "Good," I replied, my voice purposely adopting a weak, raspy quaver before snapping back to my normal steel tone. "Let's go to the church, Benny. It is time to walk my daughter down the aisle." I climbed the stairs out of the bunker, leaving the safety of the underground for the blinding light of the day. The stage was set. The actors were in place, and the audience was waiting. They were expecting a tragedy, but I was about to deliver a thriller. If you are ready to see how a lion plays dead to catch the hyenas, don't blink. The show is about to begin. The gravel driveway crunching beneath the tires of the Rolls-Royce sounded like the grinding of bones. As Benny brought the car to a gentle halt in front of the massive oak doors of the chapel, I took one last deep breath. The stimulant Benny had injected into my system was coursing through my veins, making my heart beat with the rhythmic precision of a piston engine. My mind was sharper than it had been in years. I could see the dust motes dancing in the sunlight. I could hear the distant rustle of silk dresses. But outside to the world, I had to be a ghost. I slumped my shoulders, letting my spine curve into the shape of a question mark. I relaxed my jaw until my mouth hung slightly open, and I deliberately unfocused my eyes, staring at nothing in particular. Benny opened the door, his face a mask of professional stoicism. He offered me his arm, and I grabbed it with a trembling hand, putting my full weight on him as I shuffled out of the car. The bright midday sun hit me, and for a moment, the world was a blur of colors. Then the sound hit me. A low collective murmur rose from the crowd gathered on the lawn. 300 guests, the elite of Rhode Island. Business partners I had made fortunes with. Rivals I had crushed. Politicians I had funded. They were all there dressed in their finest, holding crystal glasses of champagne. As I took my first stumbling step onto the red carpet, the whispers became audible. They were not trying to be quiet. They assumed I was too far gone to hear them. I saw Charles Dubois, a real estate developer I had mentored in the 80s, lean over to his wife. "Good God, look at him," Charles whispered, shaking his head with a mixture of pity and disgust. "He looks like a walking corpse. I heard he barely knows his own name anymore." His wife, a woman who had eaten at my table every Christmas for a decade, covered her mouth with a gloved hand. "It is tragic," she replied. "To build all that and end up like a drooling vegetable. Madison is a saint for taking care of him. I would have put him in a home months ago." The words stung like salt in an open wound. These people were writing my obituary while I was still standing in front of them. They saw a ruin. They saw a man whose time had passed. They didn't see the predator hiding behind the mask of senility. I forced my legs to drag, scuffing the expensive leather of my shoes against the carpet. I let my head loll to the side, giving a vacuous smile to a waiter who looked terrified to make eye contact. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to straighten up, to roar, to tell them I was Victor Calloway, and I could buy and sell every single one of them before breakfast. But I held on to the role. The trap had to be perfect. Then came the performance of the day. Madison detached herself from a group of bridesmaids and came rushing toward me. She looked radiant, a vision in white lace, but as she got closer, I saw the tightness in her jaw. She wasn't running to greet a beloved father. She was running to manage a liability. "Daddy," she cooed, her voice pitched high and loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh, thank goodness you are here. We were so worried you wouldn't feel up to it." She threw her arms around me, burying her face in my shoulder. To the crowd, it looked like a tender embrace, but I felt her hands patting my jacket pockets, checking for a phone, checking for anything I shouldn't have. She pulled back her hands, gripping my biceps with surprising strength, her nails digging into the fabric of my suit. "Did you take your medicine, Daddy?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. Her eyes searched mine, looking for the telltale dilation of pupils, the confusion. I blinked slowly, letting a beat of silence pass before I answered. Medicine," I stammered, my voice cracking. I don't remember. The blue ones." Madison forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, the blue ones. You have to take them, remember? Dr. Evans said your heart needs them for the excitement." She reached into the hidden pocket of her dress, the same pocket where she kept her cigarettes, and pulled out a single blue capsule. It was identical to the ones that had killed my bonsai tree. She looked around quickly to ensure no one was watching closely, then pressed the pill into my palm. "Take this now," she whispered, her voice hard and commanding. "Do it for me. You don't want to ruin my day, do you?" I looked at the pill. The poison. The death sentence. My hand shook violently, not because I was acting, but because the sheer audacity of her evil made me tremble with rage. She was poisoning me at her own wedding in front of 300 witnesses. I raised my hand to my mouth. I saw her shoulders relax. She thought she had won. I tossed the pill into my mouth, but instead of swallowing, I used a trick I had learned from an old business partner who used to cheat at drinking games. I slid the capsule deeply under my tongue, trapping it there. I made a show of swallowing hard, grimacing, as if it had gone down rough. "Good boy," Madison said, patting my cheek with a patronizing tap that made my skin crawl. "Now let's get you to your seat. You just have to sit there until the music starts. Then you walk me. Can you do that? Can you walk in a straight line?" I nodded weakly, staring past her at the flower arrangements. "I will walk," I mumbled. "For my girl." She turned to the crowd, her face instantly transforming back into the glowing bride. "My father is just a little tired, everyone," she announced, her voice sweet as honey. "But he wouldn't miss this for the world." She led me to a chair in the front row, right next to the altar. As I sat down, clutching my cane like a lifeline, the guests smiled at me with that unbearable sympathy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to spit the poison pill into Madison's face. But the curtain hadn't fallen yet. A shadow fell over me. I looked up to see Liam standing there. He looked impeccable in his tuxedo, the very image of a successful, loving groom. He scanned the crowd, waving at a few investors, then leaned down as if to fix my boutonniere. His face was inches from my ear. He smelled of expensive scotch and arrogance. "You made it," old man Liam whispered. His tone was casual, conversational, the way one speaks to a dog. "I honestly didn't think you would last the car ride. Madison said the dosage was high enough to knock out a horse." He adjusted the white rose on my lapel, his fingers lingering near my throat. "But don't worry. This is the last time you have to pretend to be strong. After today, you can just let go. We have a nice room waiting for you at Sunnyvale. Padded walls, no windows. You will be safe there. You can sleep all day, and Madison and I will take care of the heavy lifting with the company." He pulled back and winked at me, a chilling, soulless wink. He truly believed I was gone. He believed the man who built the Callaway empire was now just a shell, an empty vessel waiting to be discarded. He didn't see the fire burning behind my glassy eyes. He didn't know that every threat he whispered was being recorded by the microphone taped to my chest under my shirt. He was confessing to his own destruction, and he was doing it with a smile. "I love you, Dad," he said loudly, for the benefit of the photographer, who had just snapped a picture of the touching moment. I stared at him, letting a line of drool escape the corner of my mouth. I saw the flash of revulsion in his eyes, before he turned away, wiping his hand on his pants. As Liam walked toward the altar to take his place, I saw the final piece of the puzzle arrive. A black town car pulled up to the side entrance, and a man stepped out. He was wearing a dark suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase. It was Judge Silas Pendergast. He didn't look like a man coming to a wedding. He looked like an executioner arriving at the gallows. He walked with purpose, ignoring the guests, his eyes scanning the front row, until they landed on me. He stopped. He looked at his watch. Then he looked at Liam and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. I knew what was in that briefcase. The emergency guardianship order. The papers that would strip me of my rights, my money, and my freedom. They were pre-printed, pre-filled, waiting only for his signature and the date. He was just waiting for the signal. He was waiting for me to collapse. He was waiting for the public humiliation that Madison had promised. My heart hammered against my ribs, but the fear was gone. It was replaced by a cold, calculating anticipation. The players were on the stage. The script was written, but they had forgotten that I was the one who paid for the theater. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of the remote control Benny had given me. It controlled the massive LED screen behind the altar, the one currently displaying a slideshow of Madison and Liam's fake happy memories. One click. That was all it would take. But not yet. Benny had said we needed the act. We needed the crime. I had to wait until I was standing at that altar. I had to wait until Pendergast opened that folder. I had to let them think they had crossed the finish line before I pulled the rug out from under the entire world. I sat there, the poison pill burning under my tongue, the stimulant sharpening my senses, and I waited for the music to start. The wedding march, the sound of my daughter's betrayal, and the soundtrack to my revenge. Before I take that walk, tell me in the comments, if you held the power to destroy the people who hurt you, would you use it immediately? Or would you wait for the perfect moment to make it hurt the most because I chose to wait? And trust me, the wait was worth it. The ceremony had transitioned into the reception, a seamless flow of opulence that moved from the chapel to the grand ballroom. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the soft murmur of polite conversation. But to me, it smelled like a battlefield. I sat at the head table, my hands resting on the white tablecloth, still feigning the tremors that had become my armor. The pill Madison had forced upon me was still lodged beneath my tongue, bitter and dissolving slowly, a constant reminder of the betrayal, sitting just a few feet away. The moment for the toasts arrived. This was the signal. I knew the script as well as they did. This was when the grieving, senile father was supposed to mumble a few incoherent words, collapse into a heap of medical distress, and be carted off to oblivion. The room fell silent as the best man finished his speech, and all eyes turned to me. The father of the bride, the patriarch, the wallet. Liam approached the table. He didn't hold a champagne flute like everyone else. In his hand, he carried a large, heavy crystal goblet filled with a dark crimson liquid. It was a vintage Cabernet, or at least that is what it looked like. I knew better. To the guests, it looked like a thoughtful gesture, a son-in-law catering to an old man's preference. To me, it was the final nail in the coffin. "Here you go, Dad," Liam said, his voice projecting warmth for the benefit of the room. "I know the bubbles upset your stomach, so I poured you a glass of the '98 Rothschild. It is your favorite." He placed the glass in front of me. The liquid swirled dark as blood. I looked up at him. His eyes were cold, daring me to refuse. He needed me to drink this. The arsenic in the pill was the primer, But this drink likely contained the catalyst to the heavy sedative that would drop me to the floor in front of the cameras. I reached out for the glass. My hand shook violently. I let my fingers spasm, knocking the stem against the base of the glass, making a sharp, clinking sound that echoed in the silent room. I saw guests in the front row flinch. They were watching a train wreck in slow motion. I could see the pity in their eyes, the way they whispered behind their hands. Poor Victor. He shouldn't be here. It is cruel to let him embarrass himself like this. I gripped the stem of the goblet, lifting it with agonizing slowness. The wine sloshed dangerously close to the rim. I let a few drops spill onto the tablecloth, staining the pristine white linen. I saw Madison stiffen. She was sitting to my right, her hands clenched in her lap. She wasn't looking at my face. She was staring at the glass, her eyes wide with anticipation. She was waiting for me to drink. She was waiting for the show to begin. I stood up. It was a struggle. I pushed down on the table, my knuckles turning white. I let my knees buckle slightly, then straightened up, swaying like a tree in a gale. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. 300 people held their breath. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the frantic beating of my own heart, fueled by the adrenaline cocktail Benny had given me. I looked out at the crowd. I saw faces I had known for decades. Business partners, friends, people who had respected me. Now they looked at me as if I were already dead. I turned my gaze to Madison. She looked flawless in her custom gown, a vision of bridal perfection. But beneath the lace and silk, I saw the rot. I saw the $12 million debt. I saw the daughter who would sell her father for a clean slate. I cleared my throat. It was a dry, raspy sound. To my daughter, I stammered, letting the microphone catch the waver in my voice. Madison leaned forward, a fake smile plastered on her face, but her eyes were screaming at me to drink the damn wine. Drink it and die, old man, her eyes said. I lifted the glass higher. My hand trembled so hard that the wine splashed over my wrist, running down my sleeve. I looked at Liam. He was standing just behind Madison, his hand resting possessively on her shoulder. He gave me a subtle nod. Do it. I brought the glass to my lips. I smelled the wine. Beneath the oak and berry notes, there was a faint metallic tang. Arsenic. I paused. I looked confused. I looked at the glass, then at the crowd, then at Madison. I don't... I mumbled, letting the glass drift away from my mouth. Madison's patience snapped. She couldn't risk me putting the glass down. She couldn't risk me walking away without the sedative in my system. She stood up, reaching out to steady my hand, or so it appeared. Just drink it, Daddy, she hissed through her teeth, her voice low but audible to those nearby. It will make you feel better. This was the moment. The proximity was perfect. The angle was perfect. I let my body go limp for a fraction of a second, as if my legs had finally given out. I lurched forward, a violent, spasmodic stumble. As I fell toward her, I didn't drop the glass. I swung it. It wasn't a gentle spill. It was a deluge. With the momentum of my fall, I launched the entire contents of the crystal goblet directly at her. The dark red wine hit her chest with the force of a tidal wave. It splashed up her neck, across her face, and soaked into the intricate lace bodice of the $25,000 dress. The glass fell from my hand and shattered on the dance floor with the sound of a gunshot. I caught myself on the edge of the table, avoiding the fall, and looked up. The result was catastrophic. Madison stood frozen, her arms held out to her sides. The beautiful white gown was destroyed. It looked like she had been shot in the chest. A massive, spreading crimson stain dominated her entire torso, dripping down the silk skirt, pooling on the floor. The gasp from the crowd sucked the air out of the room. Someone dropped a fork. A mother covered her child's eyes. For 3 seconds, there was silence. Madison looked down at herself. She touched the wet, sticky fabric. She looked at her hands stained red. Then she looked at me. The mask didn't just slip. It disintegrated. The shock on her face was replaced by a contortion of pure, unadulterated fury. The veins in her neck bulged. Her eyes, usually so composed, went wide with madness. She forgot the plan. She forgot the guests. She forgot the cameras. She forgot the loving daughter role she had played for months. All she saw was the old man who had ruined her moment, the obstacle who refused to die quietly. "You clumsy old bastard!" she shrieked. The scream tore through the ballroom raw and ugly. It wasn't the voice of a bride. It was the voice of a banshee. "You ruined it! You ruin everything!" she yelled, stepping toward me, ignoring the wine dripping from her chin. "Look at me! Look what you did!" I cowered back, playing the part of the terrified invalid. I am sorry, Maddie," I whined, holding my hands up. My hand, it slipped. "I don't care about your hand," she screamed, closing the distance between us. "I wish you had died in that car. I wish you had choked on those pills weeks ago. Why won't you just die and leave us the money?" The room went deadly quiet. The confession hung in the air, echoing off the high ceilings. She had said it. She had said the quiet part out loud. But she wasn't done. The rage had taken the wheel. She raised her hand. I saw it coming. I could have blocked it. I still had the reflexes of a man who boxed in the Navy. But I didn't. I let it happen. I needed them to see. I needed the world to see exactly who Madison Calloway was. Crack. Her palm connected with my cheek with a force that snapped my head to the side. It was a solid, vicious slap. The sound was sickeningly loud in the silent room. My glasses flew off my face and skittered across the floor. I stumbled back, clutching the table for support, holding my cheek. I looked at the crowd. They were paralyzed. Jaws were on the floor. The socialites of Newport, who had seen scandals and affairs, had never seen a bride assault her 77-year-old father at the head table. They looked at Madison with horror. Madison stood there, panting, her chest heaving. Her hand was still raised. She looked around, suddenly realizing what she had done. She saw the cameras flashing. She saw the look of disgust on the faces of her friends. She saw Pendergast in the corner, closing his eyes and rubbing his temples. But it was too late. The bell had been rung. Liam rushed forward, grabbing her arm. "Madison, stop!" he hissed, trying to pull her back. She shoved him away. "Don't touch me. Look at this dress. It is ruined." She turned back to me, pointing a shaking red-stained finger at my face. "Get him out of here. Get him out of my sight before I kill him myself, Pendergast. Where are the papers? Sign them. Declare him incompetent right now. He is a danger to himself. Look at him." She was doubling down. She was trying to spin her violence into a justification for the conservatorship. She was desperate. I stood there, my cheeks stinging, looking at the monster I had raised. A part of me died in that moment. The part that still remembered teaching her to walk. The part that remembered her bringing me drawings in my office. That daughter was gone. In her place was this creature of greed and entitlement. But another part of me, the part that built skyscrapers and crushed unions, was smiling internally. Because she had just handed me the weapon I needed. She had committed assault. She had verbally abused a vulnerable adult. And she had demanded a corrupt judge to intervene publicly. I looked toward the back of the room. The double doors were closed, but I knew Benny was there. I knew Agent Miller was there. They were just waiting for the signal. I slowly straightened up. I didn't pick up my glasses. I didn't wipe the wine splatter from my shirt. I just looked at Madison, and for the first time all day I let the mask slip just a fraction. I let her see the steel in my eyes. She froze. She saw it. She saw the clarity. She saw the lack of fear. And for the first time since she pushed me into that trunk, she looked terrified. Tell me in the comments, if your child slapped you in front of the world, would you turn the other cheek, or would you destroy their world? Because I was done turning cheeks. The time for mercy was over. The time for justice had arrived. Stay tuned, because the wedding reception is about to turn into a crime scene. The echo of the slap still hung in the air, a sharp ringing in the silence that followed my daughter's outburst. The guests were frozen, their champagne glasses halfway to their mouths, their eyes darting between the ruined wedding dress and my red cheek. But while the room paralyzed in shock, Silas Pendergast saw his window of opportunity. He did not rush to comfort the bride or check on the elderly man who had just been assaulted. Instead, he buttoned his suit jacket with a slow, deliberate movement and stepped into the center of the chaos, like a ringmaster taking control of a circus. He walked past the spilled wine and the broken glass, his leather shoes clicking rhythmically on the parquet floor, until he stood directly between Madison and me. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick sheaf of legal documents, holding them up like a shield. His voice boomed through the ballroom, projected with the practiced authority of a man who had spent 30 years deciding the fates of others from a high bench. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm," Pendergast announced, scanning the room with a look of grave concern that was entirely manufactured. "What we have just witnessed is tragic, but unfortunately it was not unexpected. It is clear to everyone present, based on this violent and irrational outburst, that Mr. Calloway is no longer in command of his faculties. He is in a state of acute agitation and poses a direct physical danger to himself and those around him." He turned to look at me with eyes that were cold and dead void of any of the friendship he had feigned for 2 decades. "Therefore, by the power vested in me as a sitting judge of the state of Rhode Island, and in the interest of public safety, I am hereby invoking the emergency clause of the State Mental Health Code. I am granting immediate temporary conservatorship of Victor Calloway and his estate to his next of kin, Madison Calloway, effective this very second." The room gasped. It was a legal coup d'etat performed in real time. He wasn't waiting for a hearing. He wasn't waiting for doctors. He was using the shock of the moment to strip me of my rights before the wine on my shirt had even dried. Madison, realizing that her temper tantrum had inadvertently played right into their hands, wiped the rage from her face. She smoothed her stained dress and stepped next to Pendergast, assuming the role of the burdened daughter forced to take control. Officer Pendergast barked, pointing to the back of the room where 2 large men in dark suits were standing. These weren't police officers. They were private security contractors Liam had hired, muscle disguised as ushers. "Please escort Mr. Calloway to the waiting ambulance. He needs to be sedated for his own protection." Liam nodded at the men. "Get him out of here," he mouthed, his eyes gleaming with triumph. The 2 guards moved fast. They were professionals built like linebackers, and they closed the distance in seconds. One of them reached for my left arm, his grip like a vice, while the other moved to grab my shoulder to force me down. I felt the air shift around me. The guests shrank back, terrified of the violence unfolding at what was supposed to be a celebration of love. I saw the fear in the eyes of my old business partners. They thought they were watching the end of Victor Calloway. They thought they were watching a lion being dragged to the slaughterhouse. But they forgot I didn't come alone. Before the guard's hand could fully clamp onto my shoulder, a shadow moved from the periphery. It was a blur of motion so fast that the human eye struggled to track it. Benny, who had been standing quietly by the service entrance, materialized between me and the attackers. He didn't look like a chauffeur anymore. The deferential posture was gone, replaced by the lethal fluidity of a combat veteran. The first guard didn't even see the strike coming. Benny caught the man's wrist, twisted it with a sickening crunch of cartilage, and used the man's own momentum to slam him face first into the wedding cake table. Frosting and fondant exploded everywhere as the man crumpled to the floor unconscious. The second guard, realizing the threat, reached for something inside his jacket, perhaps a baton or a taser. He never got the chance to draw it. Benny stepped inside his guard, delivered a precise, crippling strike to the solar plexus, and followed it with a sweep of the leg that sent the man crashing onto the hard floor with a thud that shook the silverware. It took less than 5 seconds. 2 highly trained security operatives were down groaning in agony, and Benny hadn't even unbuttoned his jacket. He stood over them, adjusting his cufflinks, then looked up at Liam and Pendergast. His face was stone. "I suggest you keep your hands off Mr. Calloway," Benny said, his voice low, but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Unless you want to join them." Liam took a step back, his face draining of color. Pendergast dropped the papers he was holding. The guests were stunned into absolute silence. This wasn't a wedding anymore. It was a standoff. And that was my cue. I reached up and slowly removed the glasses that had been knocked askew. I folded them and placed them in my pocket. Then I did something that made Madison gasp audibly. I stood up. I didn't struggle. I didn't use the table for support. I didn't sway. I stood up straight, unfolding my spine until I was standing at my full height of 6 feet 2 inches. The curve of the old man was gone. The tremors in my hands vanished instantly as the adrenaline and the stimulant did their work. I wiped the wine from my chin with a napkin, moving with the deliberate, terrifying calm of a predator who has finished playing with its food. I looked out at the crowd, and I let them see me. I let them see the Victor Calloway who had built skyscrapers. The Victor Calloway who had survived market crashes and union wars. The Victor Calloway who was very much alive and very much in charge. I reached over and took the microphone from the stand. The feedback whined for a split second before I silenced it with a grip of steel. I turned to Pendergast. He was trembling now, realizing that the harmless old man he intended to bury was suddenly towering over him. Conservatorship. I repeated, my voice booming through the speakers, deep and resonant, without a trace of the rasp I had faked for weeks. Is that what you call it, Silas? Because in my world, we call it kidnapping and fraud. Pendergast stammered, taking a step back. Victor, listen. You are not yourself. You are clearly... Silence, I commanded the word, cracking like a whip. I stepped closer to him, invading his personal space until I could smell the fear sweating off him. You want to talk about the law, Judge? Let's talk about the law. Let's talk about the fact that an emergency conservatorship requires a medical evaluation by an independent physician, not a visual assessment by a corrupted judge at a wedding reception. I turned to the audience, making eye contact with the stunned faces of the city's elite. But Silas didn't need a doctor, did he? Because Silas has been paid to skip the paperwork. Isn't that right? Judge Liam tried to intervene. Dad, stop this. You are raving. I pointed a finger at Liam without looking at him. You speak when I tell you to speak, boy. I turned back to Pendergast. $2 million, Silas. That was the price, wasn't it? That is the amount that was wired to your offshore shell company in the Cayman Islands at 9 o'clock this morning. Bank of Georgetown. Account ending in 459. Pendergast's knees actually buckled. He grabbed the edge of the head table to keep from falling. How did you... He whispered, his voice barely audible. The crowd erupted into murmurs. I had just accused a sitting judge of felony bribery in front of 300 witnesses. The shock was palpable. They looked from me to Pendergast, seeing the guilt written all over his sweating face. You thought I was senile? I continued, my voice cold as ice. You thought I was a drooling old fool who wouldn't notice when his own lawyer was illegally committed to a rehab center. You thought you could erase me. But you forgot one thing, Silas. I built this town, and I know every rat in the sewer. I looked at Madison. She was shaking her hands, clutching her ruined dress. She looked small now. The monster was shrinking back into a frightened child. You wanted a show, Madison, I said to her, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You wanted everyone to see who I really am. Well, congratulations, sweetheart. You got your wish. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers. The sound was sharp and final. Behind me, the massive LED screen that covered the entire back wall of the stage flickered. The slideshow of Liam and Madison kissing in a meadow vanished. The screen went black for a heartbeat, and the room held its breath. Then the video feed cut in. It wasn't a professional wedding video. It was grainy black and white footage taken from a high angle. It was the footage from the camera Benny had hidden in the garage. The image on the screen was massive, 20 feet high. It showed the interior of the garage. It showed the trunk of the Escalade. And it showed Madison in her wedding dress smoking a cigarette. The audio boomed through the concert-quality speakers of the ballroom crystal clear. Lao gia uống thuốc chưa? Liam's voice echoed from the speakers. On the screen, Madison laughed. A cruel, ugly sound. Roy. Loại thuốc mới từ Thụy Sĩ sẽ khiến ông ta mất kiểm soát cơ thật ngay khi dắt em vào lễ đường. Ông ta sẽ đái ra quang trước mặt 300 khách VIP. The gasp from the audience was so loud, it sounded like a physical blow. Every person in the room heard it. Every person saw it. The mask of the loving daughter wasn't just removed. It was ripped off, along with the skin. I watched Madison's face as her own voice condemned her. She turned pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She looked at the screen, then at the crowd, realizing there was no spinning this. There was no lie that could cover the truth projected in high definition. But the video wasn't done. It cut to the next clip. The bedroom. Liam talking to the photo of his dead father. We are taking it all back, Dad. The Calloway house falls today, just like you promised. I looked at Liam. He was staring at the screen, seeing his 20-year vendetta exposed to the world. He looked like a man who had just watched his own execution. I turned back to the crowd, spreading my arms wide. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice ringing with finality. You came here to see a wedding. Instead, I am afraid you are witnessing a crime scene. Tell me in the comments, have you ever seen karma hit someone so instantly? Because what happens next isn't just justice. It is a complete dismantling of 3 lives. And the police sirens you are about to hear, they are the sweetest music I have ever heard. The screen looming over the altar was no longer a tribute to love. It had become an autopsy of a betrayal, dissected in high definition for 300 witnesses to see. The garage footage ended, but the nightmare for my daughter was only beginning. The video feed cut to a screen recording captured from Madison's own laptop. It showed a banking interface. The date was yesterday. The recipient was the Golden Dragon Casino Macau. The amount was clearly visible in the transfer box. 3 distinct wire transfers. $4 million. $4 million. And a final $4 million. A collective gasp swept through the room as the guests did the math. $12 million. Stolen from the corporate emergency fund I had entrusted to her access. The reason for her desperation was flashed on the screen in brutal neon numbers. She wasn't managing the family business. She was liquidating it to save her own skin from loan sharks. Then came the final blow. The audio shifted again. The screen showed Liam standing in front of a mirror in the guest suite adjusting his tie. He wasn't speaking to Madison this time. He was speaking to himself, rehearsing his victory speech. I did it, Dad. Liam's recorded voice boomed. Victor Calloway is finished. By sunset he will be locked away and I will be sitting in his chair. I will dismantle his company brick by brick. I will fire his loyalists. I will sell his assets to the lowest bidder. I will turn the Calloway legacy into dust, just like he did to us. This is for you, Marcus. This is for the sterling name. The video froze on Liam's smiling, triumphant face. The silence that followed was heavier than the grave. It was absolute. The truth hung in the air, toxic and undeniable. Every lie they had told, every gaslighting attempt, every fake tear shed over my health was stripped away. I looked at Madison. She wasn't moving. She stood amidst the wreckage of the head table, the red wine stain on her dress now looking like a mortal wound. Her face was gray. Her mouth hung open, but no sound came out. She looked at the guests, her friends, her society rivals, and saw only revulsion. She realized in that terrifying heartbeat that her life as she knew it was over. There would be no charity galas, no country club lunches, no inheritance. She was exposed not just as a thief, but as a patricidal monster. But while Madison was paralyzed by shame, Liam was consumed by something far more dangerous. I watched him. He was staring at the frozen image of himself on the screen. His 20-year plan, his life's work, his vengeance had evaporated in 60 seconds. The facade of the charming hedge fund manager cracked and fell away. His face contorted, twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. His eyes locked onto mine. He didn't see an old man anymore. He saw the architect of his father's suicide. He saw the enemy who had outsmarted him again. "You." Liam whispered the word, sounding like a curse. The whisper grew into a roar. "You!" he snapped. The rational part of his brain, the part that calculated risks and returns, shut down. He grabbed the nearest object on the table. It was the silver cake knife. A heavy, serrated blade meant to slice through tiers of fondant and sponge, now gripped like a dagger in a knuckles-white fist. "I will kill you," Liam screamed, his voice shredding the silence. "If I can't break you, I will end you." He lunged. He vaulted over the flower arrangements on the head table, scattering roses and crystal glasses. He moved with the terrifying speed of a man who has nothing left to lose. The guests screamed. Someone shouted for help. Madison cowered, covering her head. I stood my ground. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I watched him come at me, the knife glinting under the chandeliers aimed directly at my chest. I knew I didn't need to move, because Benny was there. Benny didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply flowed. As Liam cleared the table and brought the knife down in a vicious arc, Benny stepped into his path. It happened so fast that if you blinked, you would have missed the technique. Benny's left forearm blocked Liam's wrist, stopping the knife inches from my lapel. In the same motion, Benny's right hand struck Liam's throat, a controlled chop that cut off his air supply instantly. Liam gagged, his eyes bulging. The knife clattered to the floor. Benny wasn't done. He grabbed Liam's shoulder and swept his leg. Liam's feet left the ground. He was horizontal in the air for a split second before Benny drove him into the parquet floor with earth-shaking force. The impact knocked the wind out of him. Before Liam could even try to scramble up, Benny had his knee in the center of Liam's back and had twisted his arm behind him at a painful angle. "Stay down," Benny commanded, his voice calm and professional. "Do not move or I will break it." It took 3 seconds. From the lunge to the floor, 3 seconds. The threat was neutralized. At that exact moment, as if choreographed by fate itself, the double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. They didn't just open. They were kicked in. Federal agents. "Everybody down, stay where you are." The room swarmed with blue windbreakers. A dozen agents poured in, weapons drawn but pointed at the floor, moving with tactical precision. The guests shrieked and ducked under tables. The chaos was deafening, a symphony of shouting orders and heavy boots stomping on the hardwood. Leading the charge was Agent Daniel Miller. He looked older than I remembered, his hair grayer, but his eyes were just as sharp. He scanned the room, saw me standing unharmed, and gave a curt nod. Then he turned his attention to the corner of the stage. Judge Silas Pendergast was trying to make himself invisible. He had backed away during the commotion, trying to slip through the heavy velvet curtains behind the altar. He was sweating profusely, his expensive suit clinging to his trembling frame. Silas Pendergast. Miller shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and judicial corruption. Pendergast froze. He raised his hands slowly, his face a mask of pathetic disbelief. No, there is a mistake, he stammered, as two agents grabbed him. I am a judge. You can't touch me. I have immunity. You have the right to remain silent, Miller said, slapping the cuffs on Pendergast's wrists with a satisfying metallic click. I suggest you use it, Your Honor. We have the bank records. We have the wiretap. It is over. I watched them drag Pendergast away, his feet dragging on the floor, his dignity gone. I watched them haul Liam up, zip-tying his hands behind his back. He was still wheezing, glaring at me with venomous hate as they marched him past the wedding cake he never got to cut. And then there was only Madison. The room quieted down as the agents secured the perimeter. The guests began to peek out from their hiding spots, witnessing the aftermath of the most disastrous wedding in Newport history. Madison had collapsed. She was on her knees in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by the puddle of red wine and the wreckage of her plans. She was sobbing deep guttural heaves that shook her entire body. Her makeup ran in dark streaks down her face. She looked small. She looked broken. I stepped off the dais. My shoes crunched on the broken glass. I walked slowly toward her. The sound of my footsteps was the only thing audible in the vast room. As I approached, Madison looked up. Her eyes were swollen, filled with terror and a desperate, pleading hope. She saw her father walking toward her, the father who had bailed her out of every mistake she had ever made. The father who had paid for her cars, her condos, her debts. The father who had loved her unconditionally for 32 years. Daddy, she choked out, reaching a trembling, stained hand toward me. Daddy, please. I am sorry. He made me do it. I was scared. Please, Daddy, help me. She looked at me, expecting the hand to come down and lift her up. She expected the hug. She expected the checkbook to open and make the bad men go away. Because that is what I had always done. I stopped in front of her. I looked down at the woman who had smoked a cigarette while discussing my bladder control. I looked at the woman who had wished for my death so she could pay a gambling debt. I bent down. Madison's face brightened slightly. She thought forgiveness was coming. I reached out and took her left hand, the hand she had extended for help, but I didn't pull her up. Instead, my fingers found the large vintage diamond ring on her finger. It was an heirloom. My mother's engagement ring. A flawless 4-carat diamond set in platinum. I had given it to Madison on her 21st birthday, telling her it was a symbol of our family's strength and honor. I gripped the ring. Madison, confused, tried to pull back, but my grip was iron. That doesn't belong to you, I said softly. I slid the ring off her finger. It came off easily. Daddy, she whispered, her voice trembling with a new kind of fear. What are you doing? You are not a Calloway. I said, my voice devoid of anger, devoid of love, devoid of anything. A Calloway does not prey on the weak. A Calloway does not sell their blood for chips. You lost the right to wear this the moment you put poison in my breakfast. I stood up, clutching the ring in my fist. I looked at Agent Miller, who was waiting respectfully a few feet away. She is all yours, Agent, I said, turning my back on her. No! Madison screamed, scrambling to her feet as an agent moved to handcuff her. Daddy. Don't leave me, Daddy. I am your daughter. You can't let them take me to jail. I didn't look back. I walked toward the exit, the ring warm in my hand, the sound of her screaming my name fading into the background. It was the hardest walk of my life. Every step felt like walking through wet cement. My heart was breaking, shattering into a million pieces. But my head was held high. I walked past the guests who stared at me with awe and fear. I walked past the destroyed cake. I walked past the life I used to have. Benny was waiting for me at the door. He held it open. I stepped out into this cool evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. It was over. The empire was safe. The enemies were vanquished. But as I stood there, a free man, I realized the cost of victory. I was safe. I was rich. And I was completely, utterly alone. Tell me in the comments, did I go too far? Should a father stand by his child, no matter what, even if they try to kill him? Or is there a line that once crossed can never be uncrossed? I made my choice, and I have to live with it. But the story isn't quite over yet. There is one more loose end to tie up, and it involves the man standing next to me. The sound of the heavy oak doors closing behind me did not shut out the wailing. Madison's voice, shrill and desperate, penetrated the wood, a banshee cry that clawed at my back. I stopped on the limestone steps of the chapel. The cool evening air hit my face, drying the sweat that had gathered during the confrontation, but it could not cool the fire in my veins. I had walked away, yes, but there was one final nail to hammer into this coffin of betrayal. I turned around. The doors opened again, pushed by the agents dragging my daughter out. She saw me standing there, bathed in the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers, and she lunged forward, fighting the restraints. "Daddy, wait!" she screamed, her face a mask of ruined makeup and tears. "You have to listen to me." It was Liam. He forced me. He said he would hurt me if I didn't help him. I was a victim, Daddy. I was scared. I did it to survive. Please, you know me. You know your little girl. I would never hurt you. She fell to her knees on the pavement, the agents pausing to let the drama play out. She looked up at me with those big, wet eyes that had manipulated me for 30 years. For a second, just a split second, the old Victor, the father who melted at her tears, wanted to step forward. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that his flesh and blood was innocent and had been corrupted by a bad man. But then I remembered the garage. I remembered the smoke. I remembered the laughter. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't say a word. I simply swiped the screen and pressed play on the audio file Benny had isolated for me. I held the phone up to the microphone of the PA system that was still set up outside for the valet. The sound of her voice, sharp and hateful, boomed across the driveway, drowning out her sohubs. "I am so sick of his stories," the recording played. "I am sick of his face. I am sick of pretending to love a useless old man who takes too long to die. Once we get the power of attorney, I am putting him in the cheapest state facility I can find. Let him rot in his own filth. I deserve that money. I earned it by putting up with him for 3 decades. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. Madison stopped crying. She didn't look at me. She looked at the ground, the lie dying in her throat. She knew there was no coming back from that. The audio proved it wasn't coercion. It was contempt. She hated me. She had hated me for years. I lowered the phone and looked at the crowd of guests who had spilled out of the venue to watch the arrest. They were silent, staring at me, waiting for the verdict of the patriarch. "You were not forced." "Madison," I said, my voice steady and amplified by the silence of the night. "You were simply greedy, and you were impatient. You wanted the Callaway empire. You wanted the $480 million. I paused, letting the number hang in the air. I saw Liam, who was being shoved into a squad car nearby, look up at the mention of the money. "Well, I have an announcement to make," I continued, addressing not just her, but every person present. "As of this moment, I am verbally and publicly revoking my previous will. I am declaring Madison Callaway to be disinherited, effectively immediately. She will not receive a single dime. Not a house, not a car, not a share of stock." Madison gasped, a sound of pure physical pain. "But the money has to go somewhere," I said, turning to look at Benny, who was standing by the Rolls-Royce, watching over me like a guardian sentinel. I am transferring 100% of my liquid assets, my real estate holdings, and my investment portfolio into two new irrevocable trusts, I announced. Half of my fortune, $240 million, will go to the National Veterans Support Fund, specifically to aid retired Marines who have been abandoned by the system. This is in honor of Benjamin Reynolds, the man who saved my life when my own blood tried to end it. Benny stood taller, his stoic expression cracking just enough to show shock. He hadn't asked for a penny. That was why he deserved it. And the other half, I continued looking back at Madison, will go to a new scholarship fund for underprivileged children in Newport. Children who have the hunger to build something but lack the means. Children who understand the value of $1 because they have never been given one. I am giving my legacy to strangers, Madison. Because strangers treated me with more humanity today than you did in your entire life. No. Madison shrieked a primal scream of loss. You can't do that. It is my money. It is my birthright. It was never your money, I replied, cold and final. It was mine. And now it belongs to the world. Officer, take them away. The agents hauled her up. She kicked and screamed, shouting obscenities that would make a sailor blush. The veneer of the high society debutante was gone, replaced by the ugly reality of a spoiled child who had finally been told no. They shoved her into the back of the cruiser. As the door slammed shut, severing her from my life forever, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't pain. It was relief. The tumor had been cut out. As the police cars sped away, sirens wailing into the night, a slow clapping started. I looked around. It was Charles Dubois. Then his wife joined in. Then the mayor. Within seconds, the entire driveway was filled with applause. It wasn't the polite golf clap of the country club. It was a thunderous, emotional ovation. They weren't clapping for my money. They were clapping for the man who had stood up. They were clapping for justice. I nodded to them, acknowledging their support, but I didn't smile. Victory in a war against your own child does not taste sweet. It tastes like ash and steel. I walked down the steps toward the car. The adrenaline was fading, and the exhaustion was beginning to set in. I just wanted to go somewhere quiet. But the night wasn't over. A taxi screeched to a halt at the gates and a man stumbled out. He was wearing a wrinkled gray sweatsuit, unshaven, looking like he hadn't slept in 3 days. It was Leonard. He ran toward me, limping slightly. He looked terrible, but his eyes were bright with worry. "Victor," he shouted, pushing past the valet. "Victor, are you all right?" I got out. The FBI raided the clinic an hour ago. They found me. I came as fast as I could. I reached out and gripped my old friend's hand. Leonard looked at the police lights fading in the distance, then at me. He saw the tuxedo, the defiant stance, and the calm in my eyes. He realized he was too late to save me, but just in time to serve me. "I am fine, Leonard," I said. "Better than fine. I am free." Leonard let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a week. "Thank God. I thought Pendergast had won." "Pendergast is in cuffs, Leonard," I said. "And so is Madison." Leonard's eyes widened. He looked at the mansion looming behind us. The Callaway estate. A symbol of my success, but also the scene of the crime. The place where my daughter plotted my murder. "What do we do now, Victor?" Leonard asked, his lawyer brain kicking back into gear. "We need to file restraining orders. We need to secure the assets. We need to deal with the press." I looked up at the house. I looked at the balcony, where Madison used to play as a child. I looked at the window of the room where she smoked that cigarette and planned my demise. I couldn't spend another night under that roof. The walls were stained with treachery. "Sell it," I said. Leonard blinked. "What, the house?" I said, my voice firm. "Sell it. Tonight." "Victor, it is 9 o'clock at night," Leonard stammered. You can't just sell a $20 million estate in the middle of a crime scene. I turned to the crowd of guests who were still lingering, waiting for their cars. I spotted Charles Dubois. He had been trying to buy my property for a decade to expand his adjoining golf course. Charles I called out. Dubois turned, surprised. Yes, Victor. Do you still want the house? I asked. Dubois looked at the mansion, then at me. He saw I wasn't joking. Victor, you know I do. But this isn't the time to discuss real estate. I pulled a pen from my pocket. I grabbed a cocktail napkin from a passing waiter's tray. I flattened it on the hood of the Rolls-Royce. I am selling it to you for $15 million, I said, writing rapidly. That is $5 million under market value. But the deal is, you take it as is. Furniture, paintings, memories, everything. And you take possession right now, tonight. I walk away with the clothes on my back. Dubois walked over, his eyes wide. He looked at the napkin. He looked at Leonard. Is this legal? Dubois asked. Leonard sighed, pulled a notary stamp from his briefcase, which he apparently carried even when kidnapped, and looked at me. If he signs it, and I witness it, it is a binding contract of intent. We can formalize the deed tomorrow. I signed the napkin. Victor Calloway. The signature was strong. No tremors. I handed the pen to Dubois. He hesitated for a second, then signed. Done, I said. I tossed the keys to the front door onto the gravel driveway. It is your problem now, Charles. Burn it down for all I care. I turned to Benny. Start the car, Benny. Where are we going, boss? Benny asked, opening the rear door of the Rolls. I looked at the open road. I had no home. I had no family. But I had my life. I had my dignity. And I had a loyal friend. Drive to the airport, I said, sliding into the leather seat. I hear the Grand Canyon is beautiful this time of year. And Benny. Yes, sir, stop calling me boss. We are partners now. As the car pulled away, leaving the estate and the wreckage of my past in the rearview mirror, I didn't look back. I took a deep breath. For the first time in 30 years, I didn't have to worry about who was trying to steal my throne. I wasn't a king anymore. I was a traveler, and the road ahead was wide open. Tell me in the comments if you could sell everything and start over tomorrow. Where would you go? I am heading west. And for the first time in a long time, I am driving into the sunrise, not the sunset. This is Victor Calloway signing off. Over and out. The flickering light of the television in the corner of the dusty roadside diner was the only source of illumination in the pre-dawn gloom. I sat in a booth with cracked red vinyl seats, nursing a mug of black coffee that cost $1.50. It tasted better than any vintage espresso I had ever been served in a boardroom. On the screen, the morning news anchor adjusted her papers, her face serious as the banner headline scrolled across the bottom. Breaking news in the Calloway estate scandal, she announced, her voice tinny through the old speakers. Sentencing was handed down today in the high-profile case that shocked Rhode Island. Madison Calloway, the daughter of industrialist Victor Calloway, has been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for embezzlement, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The screen cut to footage of Madison being led out of the courthouse. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit. Her hair, once perfectly styled, was pulled back in a messy bun. She looked at the cameras, and for a moment, I saw the ghost of the little girl I used to know. But there was no defiance left in her eyes, only a hollow, crushing defeat. She didn't look like a socialite anymore. She looked like exactly what she was, a criminal who had gambled her soul and lost. The anchor continued. Her accomplice, Liam Sterling, also known as Liam Gallagher, received a sentence of 20 years without the possibility of parole. He was convicted of attempted murder, identity fraud, and grand larceny. The judge cited the premeditated nature of his vendetta against Mr. Calloway as a primary factor for the harsh sentence. Former Judge Silas Pendergast has been disbarred, and is awaiting a separate trial for judicial corruption. I watched as they showed Liam. He wasn't looking at the ground. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched. He looked like a man who was already dead inside. He had spent 20 years consumed by the fire of revenge, and now that fire had burned him down to ash. I reached for the remote control sitting on the sticky table and pressed the power button. The screen went black. The noise of the world faded away. I didn't feel a surge of joy. I didn't feel a desire to cheer. I just felt a profound, quiet sense of closure. It was done. The chapter was closed. The ink was dry. I took a sip of coffee and looked out the window. The sun was just starting to crest over the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of violet and orange. A month ago, I would have been waking up in a 400 thread count sheet, dreading the day, wondering why my hands were shaking, wondering if my daughter loved me. Today, I woke up in a motel room that cost $60 a night, and I had never felt more at peace. I threw a $5 bill on the table for the waitress and walked out into the parking lot. The morning air was crisp and cold, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. It was a long way from the salty ocean breeze of Newport, and I preferred it. Standing next to the gas pump was a truck. It wasn't a Rolls-Royce. It wasn't a Bentley. It was a used Ford F-150 painted a deep, sensible blue. It had a few scratches on the bumper and a bed liner that had seen some work. I had bought it with cash 3 weeks ago. It was the first vehicle I had driven myself in 15 years. Leaning against the hood was Benny. He wasn't wearing his chauffeur's uniform anymore. The stiff black suit and the cap were gone. He was wearing a pair of faded Levi's, a gray t-shirt, and a flannel overshirt unbuttoned at the front. He looked younger, more relaxed, like the Marine he used to be before he started driving a rich old man around. I walked up to him. I caught my reflection in the side mirror of the truck. I barely recognized the man staring back. The tuxedo was a distant memory. I was wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. My work boots were scuffed. I looked 10 years younger. The stress lines around my mouth had softened. The hunched posture of the victim was gone. I stood straight, breathing in the freedom. "Ready to roll?" Sir Benny asked, pushing himself off the hood. He tossed the keys in the air and caught them. I looked at the keys. Then I looked at Benny. "There is one thing we need to get straight, Benny," I said, leaning against the truck beside him. Benny looked worried for a second. "What is that? Did I forget to check the oil?" "No," I said, shaking my head and smiling. "It is the name." "Sir." "Boss. Mr. Calloway. Leave them in Newport. They belong to the guy who owned the mansion. That guy doesn't exist anymore." Benny paused, looking at me with a mixture of surprise and respect. He understood what I was asking. He understood that the dynamic had shifted. We weren't employer and employee. We were two survivors who had walked through the fire together. "All right," Benny said slowly, testing the water. "So, what do I call you?" "My name is Victor," I said. "Just Victor." Benny grinned. A real wide grin that reached his eyes. "All right, Victor. So where are we heading?" "Florida. I hear the fishing is good in the Keys this time of year. Retired guys love Florida." I laughed. It was a genuine belly laugh, loud and uninhibited. I shook my head. No Benny. No Florida. No shuffleboard. No waiting around to die in the sunshine. I looked west toward the open highway that stretched out like a ribbon of possibility. "I want to see something big," I said. "Something that makes me feel small. Something that has been there for millions of years and doesn't care about stock prices or inheritances." Benny nodded, following my gaze. "The Grand Canyon, the Grand Canyon." I confirmed. "And then maybe Yellowstone. And then maybe we drive up the Pacific Coast Highway until we run out of road." "I have never seen the redwoods, Benny. Can you believe that I built skyscrapers of steel and glass, but I never took the time to look at a tree that has stood for 2,000 years? Benny opened the driver's side door, then stopped. He looked at me, then tossed the keys across the hood. "You drive Victor," he said. "It is your truck." I caught the keys. The metal felt cool and solid in my palm. I walked around to the driver's side. I climbed in. The seat was firm. The steering wheel was simple plastic, not leather. I turned the key. The engine roared to life with a throaty rumble that vibrated through the chassis. It was the sound of power. Real power. Not the quiet, insulated power of a luxury sedan, but the raw, mechanical power of a machine ready to work. Benny climbed into the passenger seat and threw his duffel bag in the back. He pulled out a paper map and unfolded it on the dashboard. No GPS, no tracking, just lines on paper and the sun to guide us. As I pulled the truck onto the main road, watching the diner disappear in the rearview mirror, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not for the money I had kept, although that allowed us this freedom, but gratitude for the truth. I thought about Madison one last time. I thought about the emptiness of her greed. She had chased the shadow of wealth and lost the substance of life. She believed that family was defined by a last name and a bank account. She believed she was entitled to my life simply because she carried my DNA. But as I looked over at Benny, who was humming along to a classic rock song on the radio, tapping his hand on the dashboard, I realized the greatest lesson of my 77 years. Blood does not create family. Blood is just biology. It is an accident of birth. You don't choose your parents, and you don't choose your children. But family, till family, that is a choice. Family is the person who pushes you into a trunk to save your life when everyone else wants to bury you in a box. Family is the person who stands between you and a knife. Family is the person who stays when the money is gone, when the title is gone, when the prestige is gone. I lost a daughter back in Newport. That is a pain that will never fully heal. It is a scar I will carry to my grave. But in the darkness of that garage and in the light of this new morning, I found something I never expected. I found a son. Benny didn't want my fortune. He didn't want my status. He just wanted me to be safe. That is loyalty. That is love. And that is worth more than every skyscraper I ever built. I shifted the truck into high gear, the engine humming as we hit the highway speed. The road ahead was long, winding, and unknown, and I couldn't wait to see every mile of it. If you are listening to this and you feel alone because the people who share your blood have betrayed you, I want you to know something. You are not broken. You are not finished. Your family is out there. They might not look like you. They might not have your last name. They might be driving a truck or working in a diner or sitting next to you on a bus. Look for the people who protect you when you are vulnerable. Look for the people who tell you the truth when it hurts. Look for the people who don't ask for anything in return. That is your family. And if you believe that loyalty is the only currency that truly matters in this life, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to the channel because Victor and Benny have a lot of miles left to go. And trust me, you are going to want to hear what happens when two free men take on the world. This is Victor signing off. I will see you on the road.